Morning to you.
I'm sure in the national conversation you would have heard words like minimum wage, living wage, productivity, a whole host of things, and HR professionals have to deal and answer most, if not all of them. We're happy to be joined this morning by Nicholas Roberts, who is the Vice President of the Human Resources Management Association of Barbados, along with him a member in Brenda Evelyn. Good morning, both of you.
Hi, good morning,
Morning,
Pearson.
Pearson.
Thank you so much for joining us. And by the way, you know, your president is a friend of Morning Barbados, so you are also a friend of Morning Barbados, just to let you know. By natural progression.
Thank you.
You're very welcome indeed. There's been a lot of conversation recently about productivity because there's a lot of demand about wage increases. I want to start with what is considered to be the minimum wage. Who can explain to me what the minimum wage is and how does it compare with what we call a living wage?
Okay, I'll go first and Nicholas can join me.
Sure.
The minimum wage is actually this minimum wage we had in 2021. We had a new minimum wage, but the old minimum wage was in 2017, and that was repealed. And then we have, at that time, it was the first one was $6.25, and the new one is now $8.50, and that it was for the shop assistants and security guards, shop attendants. So the minimum wage and the living wage, yes, you have a wage and you're trying to live on it, but what is the living wage? How can you live on what you are getting? And these are some of the challenges that most people, even those who are not earning minimum wage and those at the top, they're really having great difficulty with it because of all the charges and everything is so expensive. So how do you live on $8.50 an hour, which brings you and then do all the things that you have to do? So it means that you're going to have to, I don't know how much more you can tighten your belt, but you're going to have to, to use a Bajan parlance, you're going to have to cut and contrive, whatever that means.
Well, often we hear the rate is attached to the function, the job function. And sometimes you see some situations where the job function is really far exceeding what the rate is. As HR professionals, you're called upon to navigate the people through that, whether it's the employer or the employee, so that we can have a happy ending. How do we then begin to work with those employers so that they appreciate that there is such a thing as setting fair functions within the job description and attaching the appropriate rate of pay for that particular function?
Okay, Pearson. So what usually happens is that the industry usually conducts market studies or market research to see how it is that a job should be pegged or priced. Unfortunately, within the Caribbean, because it's not synonymous with just Barbados, market data is not readily available when it comes to compensation. So, for instance, if you look at the public sector for an example, you would see the Barbados emoluments. You can go online and you can see the salary scales within the government sector or the public sector. But within the private sector, it isn't so easy to get that information. So when employers are pegging or pricing a job, sometimes they can either overprice or underprice a job. So you may see someone is asking that or calling a job an entry-level position, but at the end of the day, they're asking for 3 years of experience, as well as asking for someone to come in with a bachelor's degree, which is fine. But are you going to be able to pay someone for that bachelor's degree or for those 3 years of experience? So sometimes, like I said, employers either peg the job below or above market rate.
So who determines this market rate? Is it by the vast number and then you find a middle ground somewhere? How do you determine the market rate?
So I don't want to get too technical, but there's something called compensable factors in terms of when you're determining the price or the cost of a job. So for instance, the complexity of a job, how much manual or physical labor someone may have to do in a job, the technical aspects of a job, all of these things go into determining how much a job is cost. From that, you would do a job analysis or evaluation, and then a price is given to the job. And then the market usually operates from that. So for instance, just using an arbitrary number of $10, sometimes the job may be pegged at $10 at market rate. But like I mentioned before, if it is that you're a market leader, you may say, you know what, I can afford to pay my employees $15 for that job. But like I said, you then have to be able to one, pay your employees, and two, be able to benefit from paying them at that rate.
So back to the minimum wage for just a moment now. So gas attendants are often considered to be the ones who are paid at the minimum wage, those kinds of job functions. So are you saying to me that there is a situation in Barbados where there are people who can perhaps afford, but they stick to the minimum wage? And if so, how do we begin to agitate so that that worker is paid above what is considered the minimum wage?
To answer that, I'll answer that, and that is a definite yes. We still have employers who are adamant that they're not going to pay employees anything more than the minimum wage, which disadvantages the employees. Hence, you're going to have a very high turnover in staff, because if the staff can get another job for another, let's say, $2 more or $5 more, they're going to leave. So trying to keep them, you might pay them the minimum wage, but you are not really going to keep them. You're going to have that high turnover, which you don't want. And hence why you see every time you go to the service station, you see different attendants, because they're not sticking around for one reason or another. And I'm not saying it is all the employer's fault. Sometimes it's the employees also, because they're dealing with customers of all different ages and attitudes and whatever. And the younger people will say, I am not putting up with this, not for this money. So if you want to maintain and retain your staff, you have to look at what they are worth, look at those good workers, and try and see if you can keep them and pay them what is a decent wage.
Decent wage, which is not always necessarily the minimum wage. But there's sometimes that the employee has grand expectations of themselves, especially when they know the job that they're in. So how do you, as an HR professional, how do you tempt that down so that I don't go beyond in my expectations?
So
this is where sorry, go ahead, Nicholas.
Yeah, so I was saying, employers and employees need to start having conversations. Brenda and I were having a discussion, and sometimes within organizations, we realize the discussions are not being had between the employer and the employee. So even within the interview stage, when it is that you're interviewing a candidate, you need to set the expectation, what it is that you're looking for the potential candidate, and then when they get the job, and vice versa. Because I, as a candidate, I am also interviewing you. And I don't think many people realize that. So from there, you need to set the expectation, what you're looking for to get out of this job. And when people start to have these honest and open and frank discussions, then they can say, you know what, this is my expectation. And maybe I may have to lower my expectation or bring my expectation down, or we may need to meet in the middle. But I think sometimes what the component that is missing is just communication between the two parties.
You talk about.
If I can
Go
add
ahead,
to
Brenda.
that,
Yes.
If I can add to that, Pearson, it all comes down to performance appraisals. Something that an employee can, the sky is the limit for. In those organizations, and it mostly is international organizations, where they have performance appraisals and it's monitored properly, and everyone knows what they're supposed to do. You have measurements, you have metrics. You know, if you're supposed to answer the phone, you're supposed to answer the phone in 3 rings. So you have all the standard operating procedures there. Everything is there. And then your supervisor or your manager is monitoring what you are doing to make sure that you are meeting the standards that are required. But that is not happening. Everybody is shying away from performance appraisals. And at the end of it, if they're doing them, they are not really reflecting the person's growth and development. Where are you at? How do I get from where I am to where you want me to be? How are you going to help me? As Nicholas said, these are the conversations that must be had. And this is why the performance appraisals. must be done, because if you don't do them and don't do them properly, if you do them and you don't do them properly, you're still back at square one. So what are you measuring? You're just giving people money because they come to work. Some people are present. We have a situation where we have presenteeism. You know what that is?
Yes.
Pearson?
Yes.
You're present and you ain't drive a stroke yet. But you turn up, right? And there is a lot of that. And we tend to link the public service and the private sector. But we can't do that. We should not do that, I should say. The private sector is governed by the General Orders and the Public Service Act, and whatever other directives comes from the now director, I used to call it Chief Personnel Officer. The private sector and the statutory corporations are governed by the Employment Rights Act and all the laws of Barbados, two completely different things. So when we're talking about the private sector, we tend to lump private and public together. No, we can't do that because they're governed under different laws. And then the private sector must know how they are going to make a profit, because the employers or any business is in operation because they want to make a profit.
Yes.
So what is going to be profitable to us? What are we going to be offering our employees? How are we going to get there? So, I mean, this conversation, Pearson, has been going on for so long.
Yes. But it's even more difficult today given the fact that we have high cost of living. Everything seems to have risen astronomically. So how do you then begin to broach that conversation that says to the employee, I can't have this conversation with you now because I too have to spend quite a bit to ensure that you retain your job and for inputs into the manufacturing process and the like. But there's a demand for a wage increase by the employee because they too are suffering from the same high cost of living. So how do we find a happy medium between the two?
So I think culture is a very important aspect of, once again, having these conversations, because if it is that you're operating or working in an environment that you understand that your employer has your best interest at heart, and they would like to give you a raise, but they unfortunately cannot because of the circumstances, because organizations do not operate within a vacuum. They're operating within an environment, and obviously they're operating within a tough economic situation. So if you have employees that understand, you know what, I have your best interest at heart, I would love to give you a salary increase, I would love to give you a pay raise, but I can't at this point in time. Employees will be understanding if you have understanding employees. But unfortunately, sometimes employees do not feel as if their employers or the organizations have their best interest at heart. They feel as if, sometimes I'm being taken advantage of. I'm being paid what I'm not. I'm being paid what I am. I'm not being paid what I'm worth. And then they do not feel as if they can take what is being said to them at face value.
How many times can the employee accept at this point in time? Because there comes a point in time when at this point in time it's way too much and we have to agitate. And I think that's where a lot of times the unions are stepping in and saying, hold on, we've held strain for a long time. And now we're saying that's enough. So how do we begin to solve this problem called high cost of living, the call for productivity and a request for wage increase?
It is a very difficult and challenging one, okay? And it is no quick fix because the employer has to look at the company's financials, where we are at and what we can afford. With all the high costs that are coming in now, if you cannot give an employee a wage increase, there's something called rewards and recognition. Find a way of giving the employee some sort of incentive. Something to say, well, okay, let me give an example. Bus fares. Remember when we had the raise in bus fares? Some people are paying as much as $21 to get to work per day. When we take $21 out of a weekly wage of $360, multiply that by 5. I had an employee who said to me this evening, I walk to work every morning because I leave home at 6 and I walk to the location because I cannot afford the bus fare. Now, what the employer can do or might want to consider, if they can afford it, and only the financial controller can say that, let me, instead of you going through this, let me give them a bus fare allowance. I don't know, nobody don't hold me to this, don't beat me up. But let me do something to say, well, okay, I am going to, especially the people in the lower bracket, let me give you some, or even if you want to subsidize the bus fare for them, you might not be able to give them the additional 20. It depends on how many people you have employed too, the additional $21. But you can say, okay, I'm going to subsidize your bus fare. And of course, the employer can do that, and they can find a way of doing it where it is going to be a tax benefit to them. I'm not sure what category you want to put it in. The accountants would have to tell you that. But these are the things that would encourage people to come to work. You know, you have something to do. How do you do these things? And these are, we don't do rewards and recognition programs here. And a reward and recognition program, if managed properly, and that's the other challenge we have, that lots of systems and procedures that we have in HR and what the HR manager should do, they are not managed properly. Because if the CEO is not on board with what is happening, it's going to fail. Big time.
Indeed.
No
indeed.
two questions about that. Yes.
So there are little things that one can do to help to manage oneself through this situation, but obviously you can't run from facing the fact that there is an increase in the cost of living, and as a consequence, it's a fair request on behalf of the employee to make that request for an increase in wages.
It is fair.
Yeah, but in increasing wages, you're also almost overinflating, you know, some of your expenses as well. Because here it is now, you're going to find yourself eventually, I suppose, as an employer, in a situation where it's not sustainable over a longer term unless you see an increase in productivity and unless you see an increase in sales and revenue. So this measurement called productivity, it's a big word, big long word, but oftentimes it's almost mysterious to a lot of people. What is productivity and how do you measure productivity? Where do we start that conversation with employers today?
Performance
And I
appraisal.
love this topic. So
I love this. I come from a performance management culture. I worked in an organization for 13 years where everything we did was measured. And at the end of it, you did your performance appraisal. And if you were, depending on where you fell in the real rating, if you were a 2 performer for 2 consecutive years, that organization took you out of this country for 1 week and wine and dine you first class.
Wow.
But when you get back, it starts again. And I can tell you, that's another conversation, a private conversation I will have with you, Pearson. Most of my material achievements came from performance appraisals and management in that country, in that organization. Wow. So I have a passion for performance appraisals. They must be done properly. We are measuring these things. If I tell you I want you to type a letter, I go and give it to you. The manager gives me the letter and it sits on my desk for the whole day. But I want the letter in 15 minutes. You must put measurements. You must say this thing must be done in a certain time. And then you find people they're shuffling the paper. Oh, I have so much to do. I have so much to do. And they really haven't done anything yet for the day. They haven't produced anything. So where are the files that I told you that I wanted for this meeting? Where is the report? Can I have my report? Oh, I ain't get back to that yet. And it goes on and the excuses. Yes. So if you know when you are setting those job descriptions and doing the performance appraisals, that this is what is supposed to happen, and you follow those, and somebody is managing that, you're able to say to that person, listen, you're not doing what is required to do. You cannot get an increment because you have not been producing. And if you're getting an increment, it will be the minimum, because we got something called COLA, cost of living allowance.
Yes.
We might give you a cost of living allowance.
Right.
But as far as this thing about paying people just to come to work, you must produce. And I agree with Dr. Kevin Greenwich. Produce first and then talk to me about money.
Nicholas?
But also, yes, what I must say that an essential part of performance management is having coaching conversations. I think a lot of organizations have a performance management system in place, and it occurs once a year. That should not be happening. It goes back to having
Never.
ongoing conversations. You should be between your, whether it be your supervisor, your manager, and you as the
Once a
employee,
quarter, every quarter.
exactly, or even ad hoc conversations,
quarter.
particularly that you're doing something that needs improvement, or even if you need recognition, your manager or supervisor should be telling you you're doing well or you need to improve in this area. It shouldn't be a case where at the end of a performance here you're getting feedback. And sometimes people don't even get feedback at the end of the performance here. It's just a tick the box type of exercise for people.
Tick the
And
box.
you just go off and nothing happens. And then the cycle restarts. And as Brenda said, people are
Same
coming to
thing
work.
all over again.
Unfortunately, no productivity, and they're being paid. But like I said, employers and employees need to start having these conversations.
So what gets measured gets done. That's basically what the catchphrase goes with it.
Exactly.
But a lot of times employees feel that performance appraisals are punitive. That you sit, you just want to punish me at the end of a period of time because you clearly don't understand me. So it's a conversation that has to really take place. And I agree with you about the quarterly exchanges. And the thing is, if I recall correctly, that's written into our Employment Act now, isn't it? Where you're required to do certain things in a particular time frame to be assessed as fair. Should there be an unfair dismissal?
Should be an unfair dismissal. You just have to follow the process.
Yeah.
And that is when you're having disciplinary matters.
Right.
And that is natural thing. But getting back to your question about punitive, performance appraisals are not punitive. It is a growth and development tool to say to the employee, let's take, for instance, writing. Okay, I write a report. Now we know we have, and I'm not putting down young people, but they like to write in text. So you produce a report to me that written in text language.
Mm-hmm.
So when I'm doing your appraisal, I will say to you, well, look, you need to improve on your writing skills. And I will say to them, well, how do you want me to help you? You're either going to go online and do a course and decide this is when we're going to do the course, or you're going to go to one of the other institutions for 3 months where you're going to improve your writing skills. And the company will pay for you to improve those writing skills because you're a valued employee. The only area of weakness is your writing skills. So we are going to pay for your course. But if you don't pass, you're going to pay us back. Okay? So there's an,
yes.
It is, and HR is very interesting.
Clearly.
But it is that get these things done and to get the people to understand what they're going to do. And the employers themselves, they need to help the employees. Now, some of the employees you can't help.
Yes.
Okay?
Yes.
Then there's a different way of dealing with those. But those who want to progress, those who want to go and study, you don't say no to a person who wants to go and study. You sit and have that conversation and says, okay, when are your classes? How you're going to put back in your time? How we're going to do a workaround?
Mm-hmm,
It might not. You might not be the company. It might be that it doesn't suit the company.
Right.
Because, like, for instance, if you're going to UE and you have to get to classes, you might have to have time off. How am I going to get this time off?
Yes.
How am I going to give you? So these are one-on-one conversations you have to have, but you should also have a training program in the company to know that all staff will know this is the training program that we are going to follow. This is what we can do, and this is what you have to do, so that they're developing themselves.
Yes.
So if I want to be a manager, yes, I might have my first degree. But if I want to be a manager, I remember a situation. I put a young lady to act as a supervisor, and she came to me and told me, Ms. Evelyn, you put me to act as a supervisor, but I can't supervise nobody.
She's being honest. Honest.
She was being very honest.
Listen.
And I said to her, okay, so how you want me to help you? I said, all right, here's what I'm going to do for you, right? We had a training program. I said, all right, I send you to BIMAC to do the supervisory management course.
Yes.
And then I had that conversation with her. Because sometimes if it is after work, they don't want to give up time. So I says, no, we're going to pay for it. You got to put in something.
Right.
So the course starts at 5:00, right? So make sure you are present for the classes.
Yes.
And she did, because it was like, so how you suppose I don't know what to do? And she was so on it. It was a joke. And I always
Right.
remember that.
Right.
You know,
I'll tell you though,
promote people.
I
Yes,
agree.
right.
These are conversations we have to continue. I'm so excited about it as well. So this arrangement,
Yes,
this
yes.
relationship we're having with you guys at HRMAB, we want to continue. So listen up for our call so that we'll continue these conversations because it's so critical. It is so critical. If we're going to move our country forward, then we've got to be able to really look at these little, what people,
Yes,
some
we have
employers
to.
think are little things, but are big things at the end of the day. Thank you so much, Nicholas Roberts and Brenda Evelyn from HRMAB.
Thank you, Pearson. It was
Pleasure
a
having
pleasure.
you. Same here.
It was a pleasure.
Same here. Please
Yes,
say hi to
thank you
Joan for
very
me.
much.
Thank you. Thank you too.
Yes, we will. Okay,
All right.
thank you. Good. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye indeed. Morning Barbados continues right after this.
Morning, morning.